Weekly Download, a podcast about interesting games, industry news.
Brought to you by Big Games Machine.
The kind of Scorpion Sub-Zero in the last one was really good. That was clearly like a major key to it all. So we'll see.
When I think of a legendary duo like Scorpion and Sub-Zero, who else would I rank among them in terms of legendary duos? I might consider Heath and Alex Beech, hosts of the Weekly Download podcast.
Almost as iconic. And oddly, also just
Almost.
a palette swap of each other in the original format.
Are we?
Yeah, we're just a palette swap. Seriously, if people would lay us over each other, we're actually identical.
We could it's
just
morph into
I'm even paler. Which way am I going?
Hello, though. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Weekly Download.
If you're listening, that would have made no sense.
Well, it might have done. If we've got any Mortal Kombat film fans, imagine there's like that 0.1% of people who only care about the Mortal Kombat films, and they're like, "Oh, there's games based on these films." Did you know that?
What a life would you be living? Amazing.
Oh, what a life! But you'd be missing out on so much. You'd be missing out on all of the games industry news, which is why we're here, of course, to run through the biggest stories, or some of the biggest stories of the week. Now, this week, we are looking at, as always, 3 nice stories. We've got this news about Capcom. Alex, I don't know if you know, Resident Evil Requiem has sold really well, and Capcom have basically said, "Oh, we think we're going to make more money now." So we've got this news that Capcom.
It's always nice when people say, because it's the end of. We'll get into this, but it's the end of their financial year. I'm betting, and they're like,
"Yes,
yeah, we think we'll make more money this year." I mean, this is one of those scenarios where we're not speculating. We've made more money this year. Yeah. We're just saying we've increased the forecasts.
Yeah, guys, we shipped like 5 million units in a week for like our new Resident Evil game. So, yeah. Oh, yeah, and then we had like this and that. But yeah, we'll be looking at this Capcom news.
We'll get to it.
Also, we're looking at the news that developers behind Magic the Gathering Arena unionizing, and that's in the US. And then our final big story this week is the sad news that Greedfall Studio Spiders, who of course were under Nacon, they have officially closed down. And the quote I've got is that it no longer exists. The studio is gone. Obviously, that's part of the bigger situation we're seeing at Nacon. But we'll go into that. We'll go into that and more when we get started. But before we do any of that, we will take a small break. And when we come back, we will be starting with the news around Capcom. And so here we are with that first story that we just promised, all about Capcom. So this is the news that Capcom is raising its financial year 2025 outlook following a boost from Resident Evil Requiem. Yes, an outlook / forecast in practicality, maybe not.
It's like putting your hand out the window and saying, "I forecast rain," as it's
raining, guys. But yeah, if we look at the actual data here, so Capcom has revised its financial year 25 outlook upwards, unsurprisingly. We're seeing projected net sales up 2.8% to 195.3 billion yen, which is around $1.2 billion. Our American viewers, or if anyone here perfectly understands yen, then we don't need to talk about dollars, but it's good to frame that. And we're also looking at net income up 6.9%. So that's 54.5 billion yen, or around $340 million. So if we dive into the why and what's behind this, the context to why Capcom has revised these figures, one of the standouts, and Alex, I know this will be no surprise to you, like I joked in our introduction, but yes, Resident Evil Requiem shifted over 5 million units within its first week. It's already hit 7 million. Interesting to me is this data point that it outperformed the launch of Resident Evil Village by 60%. So we are really
huge.
Yeah, we are seeing that Resident Evil Requiem on its own is part of this. But the one more thing I'll say before I allow you to dive in, something else which I think is really fascinating is that, and I know that a lot of these games have gone on quite heavy sales, on heavy discounts, but the launch and success of Requiem has had a really big effect on the back catalogue of Resident Evil games. and we're seeing big boosts in sales for remake of Resident Evil 4 and Village in particular. So Resident Evil done incredibly well. Capcom done incredibly well. Is that a surprise?
I mean, I think part of this story as well that it isn't just RE. I mean, Pragmata's obviously come out and smashed it as well. What's that? Over a million sold.
Yeah, that was 1 million in its first weekend. I don't think we've had updated sales since, but to do that in 2 days.
Brand new IP. I mean, part of me holds out that it's an extension of PN03, but I seriously doubt it is. Which would oddly have come out the same week as RE4, or the same period as RE4, not the same week. Many moons ago. Anyway, not the point. I mean, it's really interesting that the kind of bleed over of the old sales makes a lot of sense to me. In my head, I was thinking like, it makes sense that people have gone back and picked up 4 because that's kind of, it's not the last time we saw Leon, but obviously it's a Leon story. So you're kind of jumping into that. And if you, for some reason, jumped in and maybe didn't pick up the remake of 4 because you dropped out of everything, and then you saw this was the closing of the raccoon storyline, maybe that plays into that, bringing fans in. Similarly, 8 doesn't connect too heavily to the series, so I think that is more just kind of a jumping back in and kind of wanting more Resident Evil because it was so good. Like I do, and combined with the sales, obviously. So it's really good to see that it does have that kind of echo back through the catalogue. The fact that it's the most recent 2 probably makes sense, and that's probably the first time they've seen it's not the first time they've seen large discounts, I know, because Village has been up quite a lot, but maybe it's the first time Resident Evil's been in mind while these big discounts have come up and people have thought about jumping in.
Yeah, and I think they were very big discounts as well, weren't they? I feel
they Capcom regularly gives like 60 to 80% discounts on the old Resident Evil games. Like I've picked up most of them on 50 or 60%.
It makes so much sense, though, doesn't it?
Because
really,
I buy.
It's I think this idea of, hey, we're releasing a new game. Obviously, that's full price, worth saying that on the, I don't know if they did it on other platforms, but on the Switch too as well, you had the bundle they did of the 3.
I was going to ask how much that plays into it.
That the 2 older games, and that was a really good deal. And I think it makes total sense that Capcom have done these sales and turn around and be like, hey, you like this one? We'll go and get this one for $5. And that's definitely, I think Requiem is the headline part of this forecast and why it's tilted upwards, but it is also just smart business, I think, on Capcom's part, that not only we have had Pragmata, we've had Monster Hunter Stories 3 do really well, but that Resident Evil core, they've had a really great couple of months, and that is through releasing a great game and then also opening the floodgates to the older entries and saying, take your pick. Because it's not a gamble to go and play them if you're not having to pay $60 for it.
I would be fascinated as kind of an extension of this. I'm going to call it an echo of like the effect, the impact on past titles. I'd love to see numbers to see if the the pretty bad Resident Evil animated movies that are canon to Leon's story got any uplift of this on Netflix or Amazon. Because they're not very good.
Chances?
Bless them. They're odd, actually. They're not bad. The issue with them is they try and follow a storyline, so they all end with a big monster fight, which is unnecessary. I just want them to be like political thrillers, and they never are. They're just like games without the gameplay, which
give us what we want. I think it's the fact that you've brought up the films is, I think we can lead on to another point here, which is of interest, which is the fact that not only are we seeing the success for Capcom on the game side, but somewhat similar to when we spoke about Koei Tecmo and their non-game related activities, we're seeing Capcom's arcade and amusement side of things is doing really well too. Obviously, I understand that's still games, but it's a slightly different sector, isn't it? And I think
not home. I think is the difference.
And that shows to me that even in the arcades, even in when you've got all these different options of things to play, people are still levitating towards Capcom brands and Capcom properties, which I guess the two kind of go hand in hand. If Resident Evil does really well on home console, then it does make people more likely to engage with Capcom games when they see them out and about, potentially.
I'm sure I saw they were doing like a run through the original Spencer Mansion in an arcade style first-person shooter, but I might be misremembering that.
That
and
might just be a
considering it was something
dream
else.
you've had.
Yeah,
because it does sound. It sounds
sounds very much like something Alex would be into. Yeah, the one thing I will say
is that
quite...
Mr. X barging through my bedroom door? See, there you go. Look, I know Resident Evil knowledge. I know Mr. X.
Well done.
Yeah,
well done.
That was good. I pulled that one out of the.
Just grabbing it from the ether.
Yeah.
One thing that is quite nice about this, I'm not going to say reassuring, but Capcom has resisted. They still do like updates, DLC, stuff like that, but none of these games really have strong like season passes or ongoing in-app purchases. They have some, and Capcom certainly has dabbled. And I think perhaps one of the reasons they haven't stuck with it is because they dabbled poorly. None of their offerings were very good when they have tried it. But it is great to see that, you know, a company not only forging ahead with new IPs, sticking with legacy stuff, but also making them all premium titles with a decent output and a decent like reviews essentially off the back of the games they're making. Like it almost speaks to a different era of games, but it's really reassuring to see that still works as a model for a large company. I don't know if Capcom's, off the top of my head, I don't know where their forecasts measure against some of the bigger companies in terms of like what they manage and what their goals are, but if they're pitching at the right level to keep everybody there and working, make their profits and go forward, it's great to see.
Well, they're doing a good job.
Achievable model.
I think we can look at the industry and think that sometimes the infinite growth model isn't the best model. I think what you said kind of leads on to something I did want to ask you, because I feel like you're my, I know you love Resident Evil. You're kind of into the... Yeah, you're into the Capcom sphere of... You're my... What is it in Smash Brothers? Shadow Fighter. Is it Shadow Fighters? Yeah, but it comes from this point that you've made around that Capcom seemingly are doing a really good job of turning high-quality games around quite quickly. We're not having to deal with 5-6 year release cycles for 200 hours. Me, it seems Capcom is really good at 2 or 3 year cycles of development, reusing engines. They're using assets intelligently. They're making games that aren't 100 hours long. From what I've seen, I know you've replayed Requiem a lot, but that one playthrough time seems to be like 10 to 15 hours from what I've seen.
There are runs that are like 3 hours, like once you're at the high end, like it's 3 hours.
But to me, I think that's I think there's a divide between what marketing suggests that players might want, which is these endless, sprawling experiences, versus the reality of what players engage with and finish. Most importantly, I think we forget that games should be finished sometimes when we buy them.
I am now going to bounce between all of those points like I'm in a game of Arkanoid. So,
well, you do that, and then that'll be our last... Anyway.
Okay.
That'll be our last point on the topic. You've got the floor.
You might have a few bits you might want clarified. So I don't say that too quickly. Firstly, absolutely, the 3 year development cycle, they've nailed down. The RE engine's clearly empowering them massively there. That said, Pragmata's obviously been in the works for like 8 years. So the fact that they are continuing to commit to some games in there, other games they've dropped, and some they've clearly kind of fostered through at like a lower level until they were comfortable with it. So I suspect their prototyping there is also quite strong, even though we probably don't have visibility on that. That 3 year development cycle works incredibly well for RE. I think they scope their games really smartly. The remakes are quite sprawling for the Resident Evil games, but that's because they're mirroring a structure that was there before. And when they've tried to cut that back, it's gone poorly. Like 3 was probably the poorest received of their recent games. It's not bad, but it came out at a poor time and it was significantly shorter than the competition. When you look at Requiem, it feels bigger than it is because of the way it's designed, the way it utilizes the space, the way it zigzags on itself, the way it makes you feel tense the first time you're playing it. So you play it slowly and it feels like this 12 to 20 hour experience, and then you go back in with unlimited ammo and it's paltry. But that power fantasy also feels quite cathartic on the back end of that. So they scope
and I guess
their games really
that almost feels like you play through it once and you've said you have, there's the fear and the tension, which gives you one kind of experience. And then you can go play it again in an entirely different way.
Yeah, running through and destroying a big boss with like in a paltry fashion because you've got a massive weapon isn't satisfying until you've had the fear and you can come back and stick it to them, right? That's the beauty of it. You get the catharsis on the back end. But to the other point, they also have those unlimited experiences, but those unlimited experiences are about building relationships with friends and building little it's clans or that are going in because they know how each other play. They're supplementing each other. I'm talking about Monster Hunter now, to be clear. This isn't a Resident Evil thing, but they build games that, you know, it pulls you back in. It's not time dependent. It's not driven like a weekly grind. It's not on a battle pass. But when you have the time, you go in and you have these really exciting, I don't know if you've played the Monster Hunter games, but when you've got a little group together and you're going party that has to go and do it, it's so much fun trying to upgrade and you're grinding to unlock the stuff that in most games would be in-app purchases, but that's not what you're there for. You got to take down that Rathalos however many times to get the bones to make your helmet or your bug swords. It's not called a bug sword. That's what I played. I should remember what it was called, but yeah. So like they've got this really interesting selection of games that are all premium titles, and I mean that in the non-in-app purchase sense.
They don't seem to.
They really scoped it all very well.
From a quick look, I think the final thing I'd say to add to you said about you look at the games they are releasing, and they don't seem to be competing with each other either.
That was that was actually going to be my point.
You've got these really strong single player games of various different genres, but then you've got something like Monster Hunter Wilds. I look at Capcom's Steam, not library, but I look at their Steam releases, and there's not really anything that competes with Monster Hunter Wilds, is there? And there's nothing that competes with Requiem or Monster Hunter Stories or something like Pragmata. None of these games have direct competition among themselves, which I'm sure helps. And it sounds like an obvious thing to say, but I think we see a lot of bigger publishers cannibalize their own games sometimes. Like if you look at Sony with Marathon and their Marathon is obviously one of very few live service games to have made out of Sony after they made such a push for it.
Survive out of Sony was the other way
to survive. But then they've got something like Fair Games, which is still in development, and that's by all accounts going to be competition for Marathon if it does come out. And Capcom's not doing that. Capcom seems to be releasing a library of very different, very.
I was going to say I don't want to. We did say we'd wrap it up, but you come to a very interesting point because you look at EA, and I don't think Ubisoft does it as well. They have like a formula that's basically there, and whether you're driving a car to the top of a hill so you get the new map, or you're climbing a tower, or you're hacking into a radar station, like it's a formula. The Ubisoft formula is there, and that starts to make everything feel a bit. But I don't think EA is necessarily standing on their own feet when it comes to like putting out all the sports games, but it does make their library feel flat, I guess would be an expression. Feel
more
monotonous.
Polite word than I would have gone for.
Well, there we go.
But I think it's true.
I am nothing if not polite. But that's where, like you say, Capcom, even though they're creating a game year on year, they are iterating almost year on year with Resident Evil, but not necessarily also benefiting from the new game remake pattern that they've fallen into.
I think it's similar to Square. I think to Square Enix. Sorry, not to.
We forgot Street Fighter. Street Fighter's also.
We did forget Street Fighter, but I think it's similar to Square, where they are not quietly, but they're releasing games at a good cadence. They're releasing, re-releases of old games. They're remaking games. They're launching new stuff. They're quite. Again, not quietly, but they're just going out there and they're doing business. And I'm not surprised to see these sales figures. To me, it's less about how they compare to other companies and more that Capcom think they're beating their own expectations, which is good. I think that's healthy, especially the way that they're doing it. And I think with that, Alex, if you've got any more thoughts, I'll let you share them. But I'm conscious of the time, so hurry up.
Okay,
this is why I shouldn't have led with the Resident Evil story.
I know. The only thing, it also maybe speaks to having realistic expectations going in, because they clearly scoped everything out, and even within that, and maybe they thought they were being aggressive with their projections, but they surpass them. And obviously, it's always easier to seem like you are modest when you've surpassed something.
Well, under promise, over deliver.
Exactly that. We can move on now.
Awesome. We can move on. Let's
like
move
you
on.
Promised.
We'll be right back, and we'll be taking a look at this news around Magic the Gathering.
And we promise to underdeliver on this next section.
And we are back, and as Alex just promised, let's try and underdeliver on this section. Let's try and really... This section's not going to be very good, so if by the end of it, it's great, you'll be happy. But yes, this next story, moving away from Capcom and to Wizards of the Coast, a supermajority of the team behind Magic the Gathering Arena are unionizing. They're not just asking for better pay, though. It feels inevitable, but AI protections are coming into this too. Now, I'm just going to read a little section from this open letter from the unionizing developers that was sent, well, not sent to, but addressed to Wizards of the Coast. I'm hopefully not going to stumble through this, but I will try my best. So
I love reading
Magic
a quote.
the Gathering. Well, so do I. It gives me a good excuse to look at the screen and it'd be very obvious that I'm reading.
I'll make awkward eye contact with the camera the whole time.
Thank you.
So
You keep an eye on the
filming
audience.
options. Yeah.
Okay. So Magic the Gathering Arena is a vital part of how the world engages with Magic the Gathering. We believe that unionizing will increase staff well-being and retention, promote transparency and ensure equity, and create the healthy environment needed to continue making exceptional products. We know the workers that make the game can and should be treated better, and our aim is to show that to the world through our union efforts. We are building the games industry we want to see in the world, which is a very, very nice... Okay, Alex, you can break contact now. Thank you. My word. I came back to my screen and that was a scary sight. But these words are being backed by over 100 developers who have formed a union under the wider Communications Workers of America. This is the first public unionization effort at a Hasbro subsidiary.
I was going to say,
Alex,
I've said Wizards of the Coast. It might be Hasbro. I don't know what the kind of breakdown of that is now in terms of who they're unionizing for and under, and
I believe it's Hasbro. I believe it's under Wizards of the Coast, which is why I think that's where the address is going. Obviously, Wizards of the Coast is a Hasbro subsidiary, but I imagine that this is between Wizards of the Coast and the team behind Magic the Gathering Arena. Sorry, Alex, something I do want to just add again. One of the core drivers, according to the union, is management's increased pressure to adopt the use of LLMs and generative AI.
Yeah.
This is despite developers who have raised explicit ethical and quality concerns. Hasbro's CEO actually recently praised AI to investors as part of their recent earnings call, I believe, while you've got the developers on the flip side who are kind of talking about, well, hey, doesn't this take away the bit of the soul of Magic the Gathering? So it seems unionization, AI, working protections, it's all the same topics that we've seen before, but there's very big example in this case.
Yeah, there's been a lot of warning signs. I kind of dip in and out of Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons content on. So forgive me if I'm not quite as up to date as I should be, or some of my information's a little dated. But there's been a lot of kind of a drive by Hasbro generally to kind of make more money from a lot of their tabletop products and move into digital stuff. And that's both with D&D and how you access their kind of campaigns and books, and also and wanting to make a game like Baldur's Gate, because obviously that was made under the D&D license, and they probably feel they didn't get as much from that license as they could have, especially considering how well Baldur's Gate 3 went. And yeah, AI is all wrapped up in part of that and trying to maximize profits. And I do think what's interesting in what the union's pushing for here, and I think it's absolutely correct, they should be pushing for all of this, is that at some point trying to get more money, better at work stuff, as well as pushing back on AI, which is obviously going to increase their productivity, it's going to be a hard fight, because every part of that, it's not just like, okay, we promise to keep doing everything we can, you just pay us more money and we'll deliver more. But if you're pulling out these tools that can help, and I'm not a huge fan of AI, as regular listeners to the podcast will know, but it is a challenge when you're trying to get everything in that equation. So I do wonder what they're going to have to concede on, compromise on. That's the word I'm groping for. Compromise on in terms of what they're pushing for at the moment. But I'm very happy to see, because as you alluded to, the soul is very powerful here, like, because ultimately drafting language, doing the incredible art that's on a lot of the Magic the Gathering cards is probably quite easy to do a few generations of without it being pulled apart, maybe 1 or 2 seasons of, but then very quickly I think the cracks will start to show, but by that time it'll be too late. And that's the problem that you run into with these things. Like you pull out the Jenga blocks and you can't always put them back in fast enough to save a brand if you've done the damage.
And nor should you, in the proper rules of Jenga, you can't do that anyway.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we can't be having that going on. I think, Alex, I share a similar point, a similar stand to you in regards to the AI stuff, although I don't want to just read that part of it and let the rest of it cloud.
Absolutely.
And let that cloud the rest of my vision. But I'd speculate, I don't think it's a coincidence that in the last 6 to 12 months, we've seen a lot more stories like this popping up. And at the crux of every single one, and it seems that it's kind of become the focal point for all of these campaigns, AI protections are being bandied around in order to also push other points as well. And I think that the use of LLMs and generative AI, I think that's the point where a lot of workers, we've seen it not just at Wizards of the Coast now, but we've seen it at Blizzard, we've seen it as Bethesda. We've seen the big story at the end of last year around Rockstar in the UK and unionization, but it feels like these mandates around generative AI are starting to act as the breaking point where a lot of workers in these bigger studios and publishers within the industry are turning around and saying, okay, we're not standing for that. Oh, and while we're here, I've got 100 people behind me, and this is what else we want. And with so many, I don't know how big this team is, but 100.
Did it say 100? Oh, yeah.
100 developers have formed this union. That feels like at any company, that's a decent size chunk of who you're working with. And I imagine this is probably quite a large part of the team. So you'd think they've got a very good starting point for negotiations here.
And I think, I don't know. I'm reading your script, and I can't remember if you mentioned this in speech or if I've got your voice saying it in my head.
Go
for it. But
they
laid off 2,000 people. If it's my
point, it's probably a good one. So yeah,
they laid off 2,000 people 2 years ago, and you can't look at that, then keep hearing generative AI and not be like, well, I'm next then, and I need some form of protection. That protection might even end up being as little as like what the severance looks like when they replace you with AI, but you need something because you need those. You can't build or plan or do anything without that. And I think the industry and the uncertainty around everything in the industry has become so great that I think every time a company tries to put anything else new in or take anything else away, it's just going to get increasingly and understandably I'm not going to dramatic. I guess I wanted to say violent, but I didn't want to say violent. But dramatic.
I think emotion is I think emotive is the word here. I think it's why I do think that the AI aspects of this will be the ones that get blown up the most, and I think they're the most important in terms of making this domino effect happen. But yeah, you're right. When you've got these big layoffs in the past, you've got the CEO of the parent company that you're working under coming out and praising this technology. It would be ill-advised to not think, okay, how can we protect ourselves? And as we are seeing, the best way to do that is to organize. And I think that obviously we've seen they have formed a union. This isn't something that's been speculated. It's happened. The question now, and where we'll come back to this story, I'm sure, is seeing what the reaction is seeing what internally this looks like. Are we going to have a situation, and I'm not going to give any examples or anything like that, but we see situations where things like this happen and then studios get restructured shortly after. Could that happen? But I think on the whole, this is I think it's good to see from my personal perspective, but I think more importantly, it is just another example of a very big player within this space now having to deal with unions. God forbid they have to deal with the unions. I've seen this and I'm wondering who's next, because I think it's going to keep on happening. I think every time it happens and it works, we don't know if this will work a long time, but every time we do see people announcing it and saying we are doing this, it empowers someone else at another studio to turn around and say, okay, well, we can join them too. I'm imagining in a few years' time, we're going to have like the Avengers Endgame of US AAA publishers unionizing, and I don't know what will happen.
Who's your Thanos going to be? That's the question.
Don't know. I'm not going to name any.
I was going to say no. Don't Underdeliver before you answer that question. Underdeliver and move on.
Underdeliver. I believe we have underdelivered that story. So, Alex, if you have nothing else to say, we can move on to our final story, where I will aim to meet expectations. And we are back with our final big story of the day. And as I did just promise, of course, we are going to aim to meet your expectations with this one. Share some analysis. Leave a few bread trails for you to go away and look into things more deeply. Maybe a few cobwebs might end up being there because we've neglected a few points. And I mentioned cobwebs because this story is around Spiders, the developer behind Greedfall, its sequel, and Steel Rising. They were a subsidiary of Nacon. I feel like it. I say Nacon because if I say Nacon, I think of Raycon. And I don't want to be thinking about Raycon earbuds. So we'll go with Nacon. But Spiders, this studio, officially has been liquidated. We reported in our, well, not reported, but in our daily download newsletter yesterday, this was one of the stories that we spoke about, and it was speculated at the time. We have now had the confirmation. Spiders ceases to exist pretty much overnight. No buyer could be found. We know Nacon itself is facing insolvency, and the studio issued what I thought was just a really sad statement, which essentially said, we don't exist anymore. Planned DLC for Greedfall's sequel, which launched at the beginning of March, I think. That DLC will still be released. The developers won't be doing it. They won't be there to support it. This will be something that Nacon handle and publish. And then I imagine from there, all the games will just not disappear, but dissipate, and that'll be that, which is really sad. Spiders has been around for about 20 years at this point. They've built some notoriety with releasing, solid AA RPGs, but I don't know. I guess we're in an era where maybe the appeal for those kind of games isn't there, and that's left Spiders in a position where, as we've said, Nacon tried to sell them, but no one wanted to buy for whatever that price was. And so here they are.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. I mean, I guess ultimately somebody's going to likely hoover up the license, because at some point that's going to be put out to the wind, and somebody feels that rather than taking on a studio, the license is more valuable to them, or going to be worth picking up, but they'll likely pull it apart, or not.
Well, we did see on the
from it.
Bringing up the license talk is really interesting, because yesterday we saw with Wu Chang Fallen Feathers, which launched last year. A few weeks ago, we heard reports that the internal team, the core of the internal team who developed that had kind of gone their separate ways. And then that IP was bought in a similar way to what we might see with Spiders, with Greedfalls. Wu Chang Fallen Feathers, the IP was bought for, I think, around $4 million. So obviously there's precedent for that, but there's another bit of that very recent example of the precedent that we're seeing. And I imagine it could happen, because I think that, to me, Greedfall definitely has enough of a name around it. I'd say enough of a community that someone could take that on quite cheaply and try something different with it. Obviously, that's good on one hand, and then the other side is that it's not the original people. So does it matter what it's called? We could see it.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard all the individual parts of this story. In terms of, I've heard of Greedfall, I've heard of Nacon. I think looking there, Focus Entertainment or Focus Interactive put out the first Greedfall, and it's clearly purchased by Nacon.
I think they
then.
published the first one, and then Nacon acquired.
Yeah. So you end up in a very weird place with that as to, licensing and where the value lies and what happened there. But this is all to say, like, it's with an industry where people are already struggling to like keep the studios open that they have. The idea of buying out Spiders probably did not seem appealing. Whereas somebody probably has a classic RPG in development out there, like, right, we'll buy Greedfall, we'll put the name on there,
Tipex it out.
There we go, Greedfall 2.
It's there's technically already a Greedfall 2, for now. But we do see it. We do see it quite a lot, don't we? Where you can probably wait a couple of years, all this IP will end up with whatever happens with Nacon. All this IP might end up in the hands of a creditor or something, and then there's a real fire sale to sell this stuff. To me, and I know it's slightly different, but I think back to a few weeks ago where we spoke about I can't think of the studio. We were talking about a studio that had moved into becoming a support studio, and I can't think who it was now.
No.
This is useless for everyone listening. I cannot think of the studio in question, but it's just this. I don't think that new studios deserve to die more than older ones do, but it always does make me sad when we have examples of teams of developers who have existed for long enough that in the UK at least they're allowed to go and buy a drink and get a driver's license, and yet they just completely disappear essentially overnight, which is what's happened here. And there'll be all this uncertainty around where the IP goes, where the tech goes, where the developers go. Very, very sad. I cannot recall that example that we were speaking about now.
I'm scrambling through our past.
Yeah, I can't see it. I can't think who it is. Let me have a try. I'll try and have a look. Alex, do you have any more thoughts about this one before we do wrap up?
Not massively. I think that the question of whether AA studios still kind of are of value or still out there, I think they definitely are. I think there are some groups that are definitely making it run. I feel like to an extent, Pragmata almost falls into that, looping background to that point. But I think there are still games absolutely did do that. I'm just
EDOS Montreal. EDOS Montreal. That's who we were speaking about. IDOS.
IDOS. Thank you for beating me to the correction.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure it was
like I know there are a couple of developers out there that are kind of putting out these kind of mid-tier games that kind of sit in between AAA and that, and I think it really comes down to how they're scoped, how long they take to develop. And I'm just not sure that it sits for those massive RPGs unless they're kind of unless the team is in an area of the world that wages are affordable, so that what you pull back in is manageable, and that's where I think things.
Yeah,
I have to buckle.
I guess the problem is if you're working on a RPG now, there's an expectation it's a really big and long game, unless it's from a small indie team. I think there seems to be not much of an audience for a AA RPG that's 20 hours long compared to what they used to be. Whereas now it's something we want 10 to 12 hours of more like. To me, if I ever played an RPG and finished it in 15 hours, I would be surprised. I wouldn't be unhappy necessarily, but I'd be surprised because I just don't think audiences now, we're not trained to expect that. So maybe it does make it less appealing. Maybe there's less of a space for it. But, I know that we're from slightly different generations, but we do look back and reminisce about the AA. Back in the day, you could get some really bad AA games, but we were happy. We were happy with them. They weren't great games. They weren't terrible games. They were just very meh games. And not to suggest that that's what Spiders did, but I think they filled that middle ground of not major, huge experiences, just something fun.
Like the
it's
Styx
not the
games.
best game ever, but fun.
I always, whenever I think of Day, I think of a very old game called Singularity, and then the Styx series of like Goblin stealth games. And there's absolutely a place for them. It's just like scoping things appropriately. And
Raven Software Singularity.
Yes. Yep, that'd be right. And just the kind of
and they'll never make a game like that again because now they're in the Call of Duty pipeline. So,
but there are so many games now that are AA succeeding. Is just the budget for a AA has, by definition, it's not AAA, but it's at a point
it's ballooned.
To develop something takes a lot of money at that kind of scale, which is why those kind of smaller experiences fill in.
Quote that. Get that. That's a social media clip right there.
God.
Making big games costs big money.
Well, basically.
Who said that? Was it Alex Beech or Jason Schreier? No, but it is. Sorry, I don't mean to degrade the point you're making because it is true. But that's the issue, is that I think there's only space for really small budgets or huge budgets, and it's very difficult for AA, especially in the West.
It's a very hard place to sit as a AA developer to need that kind of money and then have the kind of success you need to pull it back. Is the
because the sales expectations are higher and higher as well, aren't they?
And the competition's higher. Everything's going up, but not the amount of.
No, all I'd say before we move on is just looking at Greedfall: The Dying World, which is the sequel, launched in early March. I have a plugin tool, which I'm not going to say is the most accurate tool in the world, but estimated revenue of around 1 million, just under 1,000 reviews. So this is just on Steam. It looks to have done okay. Player count not amazingly high, but it doesn't look like the kind of release which would kill off a studio. As I say that, actually having gone and double checked the player count, peak player count was 940 players. So maybe we're not happy with that. But we'll sad to hear this news about Spiders, and obviously I wish that everyone connected to the studio manages to land back on their feet. Sadly, it's just we keep seeing these kind of stories, don't we? But we'll break away, we'll come back, and we'll try and raise the spirits by taking a look at a few funny stories as part of this week's Rapid Rundown. Welcome to the Rapid Rundown. Alex has just been refreshing himself for a little drink.
I've been doing that a lot.
Taking a look at 2 stories this week. The first of which I'm going to lead with our second story, Alex, actually, which is the news that earlier in the week, Atari acquired emulation studio Implicit Conversions. Now, I don't need to explain who Atari are, I'd like to hope, but Implicit Conversions are a emulation expertise studio. I think they're particularly quite strong with PlayStation, with legacy PlayStation games. I picked this one out because these kind of acquisitions to me make me think that Atari are looking around and they're trying to figure out what they can be the experts on in a very busy industry compared to the one that started with Atari in the late 70s, early 80s. And they're thinking, everyone wants to emulate games at the moment. Everyone wants to release ROM packs. They want to re-release their old games. Can Atari become the experts in emulation? And I think we'll see more of these acquisitions is my bet, because it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird one.
Okay, there we go then. Right, that story's done. On to the next one.
I guess I don't know how I don't know how much you can make on that. I guess it's going to be where that kind of lives or dies. Like, how many plastic fake Raspberry Pi Atari machines can you sell, and how are you going to package up? Because I know there's all sorts of, like, the Intellivision thing where you're buying carts independently. It's
I'm wondering if
emulate it all now.
To me, I'm wondering if they'll start acting. That's not the right word to use.
There's going to be a subscription, isn't there?
Well, my theory was that they'll start using companies like Implicit Conversions to basically go to Sony and be like, "Oh, you want to pull like the Ratchet and Clank trilogy? I'm definitely not a fan of those games. I absolutely love them. But do you want to pull this trilogy to the PS5? We can do that."
Hey, I see you lost Blue Point Studios. If we couldn't emulate your games ever again.
Why have they got like a strange American accent? Hey, man. But I mean,
I don't know what that was meant to be. But
if you look at what Implicit have done in the past, their catalogue includes the Mortal Kombat trilogy, Rayman, Fear Effect. So they're definitely a studio who are able to bring these games to modern platforms. So
I just don't know how much, as a strategy, I don't know how much money there is in it as your sole kind of way to go.
I guess though the margins would be quite low. I can't imagine it would cost much to do some of the work. So
assuming the licensors are giving it up and just want, but you're always going to be sharing the profits with whoever's licensing it. Then you got the studio.
You are.
Then I don't know.
No, we don't know. Anyway, that's Atari.
Ultimately, it's going to depend on the games they get licenses to.
True. That's very true. Please, no more. We cannot need any more Street Fighter 2 compilations. I feel like there's about 500 of them. So if we're doing anything that's not classic Street Fighter, or I'm trying to think what else I see a lot. It's always Street Fighter. But at least Tetris, you can, I don't necessarily mind Tetris as much because it's just the Street Fighter collections. I see so many. I'm sorry, Street Fighter fans. I don't have any issue with Street Fighter 2. I've heard it's quite good. But I think I can buy that around 7 different ways on the Switch at this point.
Yeah.
And I don't need to do it once.
Have you bought any of them? Because they're going to keep doing it until you do.
I told you, my fighting game experience, 2D fighting games, is Tekken Tag Tournament 2 on the Wii U.
Not 2D. Oh, okay.
Super Smash 2D. Brothers on the 3DS.
2D.
And Super Smash Brothers, just 2D Ultimate, I think. They're the only fighting games I've ever played. I hate them. I'm sorry. Something I don't hate, though, is this other story, which is all around Pokemon cards and scalpers. So at least one branch of Bic Camera, which is a electronics retailer in Japan.
It is. It's a huge one, too.
There we go. 45
it's not
stores.
Quite as good as Yodobashi Camera, but we'll take a Bic Camera if we can.
Okay, we'll go with Bic Camera because they're the ones that are doing this. And what they're essentially doing is saying we don't need...
got a great jingle.
We've got a jingle?
Well, there's always a jingle.
Give us the jingle.
I can't do it. I can't do it because it's
always
always really high pitch.
Promise a jingle and they're not delivering.
I know, sorry.
But yeah, Bic Camera, they're essentially thinking, hey, how can we stop? They're not going to ask you to go online and do one of those silly fill the box things and prove you're not a robot. Their solution is that, so here we go. So they're going to limit the amount of boxes of cards that people can buy, which is an obvious one. But what they're also going to do is ask every single customer a 15 question. That'll be a very quick quiz. 15 question quiz based on the Pokemon universe. And only those who answer the questions correctly can buy the item. There's a sign also that talks about this in the store, and it also warns that if you take a photo of the quiz questions, you will be kicked out. They will not allow you to buy everything. Which I think this could possibly be the greatest solution to scalping we've ever seen. And I genuinely think this could work across the board because I'm picturing concert tickets. If you want to buy a ticket to go see, why is Madonna the first name that's come to my head? If you want to go see Madonna in concert, here's a pop quiz you have to answer. If you don't get 70%, you don't get any tickets.
You only need 40 years of Madonna knowledge to cover it all off. I mean, the thing is,
I've got my special Pokemon shirt on today, so I think I could pass.
But look at this from the other way around. Right? My mum, bless her, love my mum, used to have to run into Toys R Us on the way home because somewhere in some newspaper they got a warning that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle toys were going to be coming into stock. So,
well, sorry, Alex, if she can't pass the quiz, no toys.
My point exactly.
She
doesn't even know what toy she came back with. I think the first time I got a Foot Soldier and maybe Raphael, who to my mind is one of the
sounds
worst
like even
turtles.
You fail the quiz. No turtles.
Remembering which one they brought back is not the same. I wanted Donatello or Leonardo. Like these were the person that follows the rule and the nerd. Is it weird that these were the two I liked? But yeah, I can't imagine the salaryman father on his way home having to suddenly have an encyclopedic knowledge of Pokemon, or he's going to have a crying child to come back
Timmy, who the hell does Greninja evolve from? Timmy, we need some help here. No, I understand that. I think the problem is it's becoming an increasingly, it is a big issue. I think you see it everywhere. I think Pokemon cards is one of the most obvious ones. But we're seeing more and more inventive ways to combat scalpers. I think the last point from this, which I find interesting, is that so if you pass those other tests, you also need to have a reward card for Big Camera.
I've got a Big Camera reward card.
And you also have to agree to let the cashier remove the shrink wrap from the box. So yes, again, I think this is genius. I think this is evil genius.
I like that one.
So they can't resell it as new and sealed. And you've brought up that very good, that is a problem, what you said. But then the flip side of this is that if this in any way can combat scalpers, especially that last thing about not being able to sell them, not being able to buy them without unsealing them, that it is a solution. I think that could work.
I think if you're buying little Takeshi full boxes, maybe there's a bigger issue.
He's doing full rips on his YouTube channel, Alex. That's why he needs them. Some 7-year-old.
Maybe there's another side to that. I think these are the wrong pile of cards, or I could flash up my Big Camera card. I still have my Mario Kart arcade card here somewhere as well.
Well, you're going to need that if you want to get any Mario items. I think that's the way it's going. So what's the lesson here? The lesson maybe is if you
hoard your old
cards. Well, maybe my lesson would be if you want to keep collecting, insert any collectible here, brush up on your knowledge, because this might come to it's in Japan at the moment. Who knows? It might end up traveling over. And then
I'm trying to think of the thing that could really stuff me if I was to walk up. In my head, I'm just going to go Resident Evil. I bet you could pull a quiz together with 15 questions I couldn't get.
Yeah, how hard are they? How hard are they? Are we talking mastermind level?
Yeah.
Where you go in and you think, oh yeah, I'm an expert at this. And then the first question is about I always think, to me, it's like, I'd go on and be like, oh, Zelda. And then the first question would be about the CDI games. Is it going to be that level of Pokemon Fire and, in Pokemon Red and Blue? How did you get Missingo to appear? And then everyone's like, oh,
I famously just finished Resident Evil 9 how many times. I'm honestly thinking, could I name the end of game boss on that now?
Maybe in that case you'd have to get up your trophy, the PlayStation trophy for finishing the game.
Yeah, I could prove it that way.
Yeah, but anyway, I think we'll wrap there. I'm aware of the fact that we've had quite a long rundown today.
Don't worry, we under-delivered.
Yeah, we did. We under-delivered. I think with the rundown, we met expectations. We promised 2 good stories, and I think we gave 2 good stories. I feel like I'm doing a review here. I know we're technically at work, but I feel like I'm in a performance review. How did the podcast go today, Tom? I thought it went pretty well. But that is it for another week, for another weekly download. As always, I do like to mention all the stories we speak about today will be available we'll have all the links down below, so you can go and have a look.
First time I've had the QR code on screen all day, I'm noticing.
Yeah, there we go. If you're watching and you're interested in our weekly download newsletter, not the podcast, give Alex's QR code a scan. That'll take you to the LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And then you can go and find it from there.
My LinkedIn page. But yeah, you can.
Yeah. Well, go and find Alex's. You can go and talk to Alex if you wish. We've also got our daily download newsletter, which is 5 days a week. You can find the links for that in the description below. And with that, that's the sign off for me done, Alex. Do you have any last thoughts this week that you'd like to add?
No. I just feel for little Takeshi who's not getting his Pokemon cards for his burgeoning YouTube channel.
Alex, he's got to get good. He's got to get his Pokemon knowledge up. It's not difficult.
If you're not wearing it round your neck and graded, are you really a Pokemon card collector?
No, you're not. And on that note, I like that's how we're ending. On that note, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.